putting up this newest addition to my background. And by the way, I hope you like it because it's going to stay there, so you better get used to it. In this episode, I will finally explain what the heck all these circles behind me actually represent. That said, episode start. So, about all these circles on the wall behind me, I have them set up in a bit of a hierarchy, so that the circle on the top is the most universal and the most fundamental and abstract, and as it goes down, they become increasingly more specific and specialized. Now, at the top of this hierarchy, we have this symbol, the flower of life, which represents universal consciousness. It is the recognition that everything in the universe is all interrelated to everything else in the same interconnected whole. Everything you do affects other people. Everything other people do affects you. Everything you do affects your environment in some way. Even the thoughts in your head. It's all connected. And this is a very, very important concept which I will return to by the end of the video. But for now, let's move down the scale a little bit. A level below unity, we reach the concept of duality. Good and evil, light and dark, positive and negative, in and out, yin and yang. In fact, that's the very reason why I added this yin-yang in the background to begin with. The concepts of yin and yang actually originated as specifically referring to the sunny and shady sides of a large hill in Japanese. Later on, the terms came to represent a much broader connotation. Personally, the way I prefer to think about it is simply in terms of motion and stillness. Either something is moving or it isn't. Because, after all, couldn't it be said that everything in the universe really does exist in one of those two states? Either it's moving or it isn't? What other alternative is there? There's no third option. And it's always one or the other. Yet, even this dualistic foundation, in which everything is either in motion or stationary, can be further subdivided into yet another duality. That duality lies in the distinction between our external environment and our internal thoughts and emotions. And because of this duality, the fundamental distinction of motion versus stillness is split into the four distinct elements of a well-balanced life. Those elements I have represented here behind me as fire, being active towards your environment; air, being active within your own mind; earth, being still towards your environment; and water, being still within your own mind. Now, I would like to address the obvious criticism that in a purely physical sense, the universe is not actually composed of these four elements. And fair enough. Look at any periodic table. There's clearly over 100 elements, none of which are represented here. However, I don't believe that these four elements represent the fundamental building blocks of everything. I believe that they are actually indicative of the fundamental necessities of life. Think about it. Life as we know it cannot exist without either water or air. All living things need water to survive. And even deep sea creatures still need air. That's why they have gills. It's so they can breathe. It's so they can pull oxygen from the water around them. And life as we know it is also dependent on fire in some capacity. Up on land, all life is dependent on the power and heat of the sun, which is literally just a giant fireball. And even miles beneath the surface of the ocean, deep sea creatures are still dependent on the Earth's geothermal energy in order to survive, which, although not the sun, is still fire. Life needs fire to exist. Life needs air to exist. Life needs water to exist. And although the connection is much more abstract, life needs earth to exist as well. After all, aren't plants dependent on nutrient-rich soil in order to grow? Now, what forms the basis of the food chain? Plant life. Plants need dirt to grow in. Those plants in turn allow omnivores and herbivores to have something to eat, which in turn feeds the carnivores. The entire food chain is only possible because of the soil, and the water, and the air, and the fire. And symbolically, each one of the four elements, representing a different set of the dualities, has a very, very intricate meaning behind it. First and foremost, I would like to begin with what I personally believe to be my own closest elemental alignment. That's why I'm wearing a red shirt, red for fire. And in a symbolic sense, fire represents passion and drive. It's having a specific goal that you are aimed towards and chasing after it with everything you've got. It's the will and the drive to change the world around you, for better or for worse. And that drive has massive implications on the world around us. By the way, all of these different symbols I have underneath the elements are actually different philosophies, and in some cases even entire religions, that I believe to embody the different elements remarkably well. The first of these are the Abrahamic religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And the reason I believe that they are incredibly representative of the fire elemental is because members of these three respective religions can become extremely, intensely, zealously passionate about their respective faiths. And these three religions do place a huge emphasis on transforming the world around us. And oftentimes that is for the better. However, there is a dark underbelly to this. While fire can mean passion and transformation, it can also mean destructive rage. Martin Luther King Jr. was a very fiery person working to secure the rights of an oppressed minority. But so was Hitler. I don't think there's much more I need to say on that. However, that's just one element. What about the others? Well, how about the air elemental? I said that air is to be active within your own mind, and that's very, very true. Air is all about creativity and freedom of thought. It's being open to the possibilities and never assuming anything. It is having the willingness to admit that maybe I'm wrong, but knowing that that's okay. It is innovative and always moving forward. Everything that has ever been invented throughout all of human history has always come from a place of creativity. We wouldn't have jet engines if the Wright brothers didn't get it in their heads one day that they wanted to fly like birds. We wouldn't have the telephone if Alexander Graham Bell didn't have the bright idea of communicating at a distance. And the reason that I am associating the air elemental with the philosophy of Buddhism is because the entire foundation of that whole religion is to not get too attached to anything. That doesn't mean that you can't still enjoy what you experience in life, as long as you don't reach the point that you are dependent on them. And this idea of non-attachment is a very, very important component of the air elemental. How could you possibly consider yourself truly a free thinker if you latch on to one specific idea rigidly without compromise? You can't. You have to be willing to accept that maybe your ideas are wrong and willing to consider new possibilities that you hadn't considered before. That's what freedom of thought really means. So the religion of Buddhism simply took one specific element of a much broader spiritual idea and extrapolated out from there. Now, the archetype of the earth elemental is all about being unmoving. It's being grounded, standing up for your principles, and knowing when to say no. Earth is all about recognizing the challenges that lie in front of you and confronting them head on. The reason I said that Earth is to be still towards the world is that Earth is uncompromising. It's all about being grounded. It's all about standing your ground, standing up for yourself. When the world beats you down, you beat down the world. It's like that one quote from Rocket.
But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Now, if you know what you're worth, now go out and get what you're worth. But you gotta be willing to take the hits and not pointing fingers saying you ain't where you wanna be because of him or her or anybody. Cowards do that, and that ain't you. You're better than that.
But it's true though. You can't let people walk all over you. You gotta know when to draw a line. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your own well-being and for the well-being of those around you is to set boundaries. The earth elemental is all about standing up for yourself. It kind of ties into a quote I once heard from a spiritual channeler named Bashar. This man, he said that we need to be in the eye of the storm, even as the winds and the rain tear apart the landscape. You can stand firm and stable, unmoving, calm and serene. That is what the earth elemental is all about. And for this reason, I put the philosophy of Stoicism underneath the earth elemental, because I believe it is very, very closely representative of the entire element. Stoicism places a huge emphasis on personal responsibility and respect. It's all about doing the right thing. It's not exactly the same thing as the earth elemental. There's a lot more specificity extrapolated out from it, but it is very, very heavily rooted in that branch of spirituality. Now, the last elemental I would like to talk about is the water elemental, and this is by far the single most enigmatic out of all of them. The archetype of water is all about going with the flow of life. Imagine that you are on a raft in a river, and the river's going pretty fast. What do? Do you paddle with all your might to push your raft upstream? Or do you simply let go and let the river carry you downstream instead, taking you wherever it may? To align yourself with the water elemental is to do the latter. It is to recognize that you don't necessarily need to work so hard. Sometimes it's okay to let life work for you. After all, you can't force a tree to grow. You can plant the seed, you can prepare the soil, you can fertilize it, you can water it, but ultimately, whether or not a tree grows is simply a matter of time. Sometimes you simply have to let the universe do its own thing. And more often than not, things will work out in due time. And the reason I placed the philosophy of Zen underneath the water elemental is because Zen isn't even a philosophy. It straight up is the water elemental. They basically just gave it a different name. So now that I've touched on what each of the four elements represent in a symbolic sense, there is one very important aspect of these four elements that needs to be addressed. And that's that each one of these has a dark underbelly. Wherever there is light, there also comes a shadow. I've already touched on the dark side of this one. Fire can either be passion or rage. It can be a creative source of life. The sun is a fireball, but it can also bring death and destruction. Look at what happened in Australia, or the west coast of the United States, or the Amazon rainforest. All of that was fire. The dark side of air would be cunning and manipulation. Coming up with new ideas is great when you're using that creativity and ingenuity to change the world for the better. But if you are using it to come up with creative ways to further your own self-centered agenda, it's not so good. The dark side of earth is to be rigid and inflexible. It is to be stubborn and so incredibly set in your old dysfunctional patterns of thought and behavior that it ends up being a massive detriment. And the dark side of water is to be compliant in the face of injustice. Sometimes it is good to go with the flow and simply allow life to pan out as it will. But other times, if the flow is directed down a negative path, you need to take action to change that for the better. And another thing I've noticed, the negative side of each of these elements is the polar opposite of the positive of their inverse element. The positive of the active external, fire, is a passionate drive to change the world for the better, while the negative of the passive internal is compliance in the face of injustice. Those two can't go together. If you are working to change the world for the better, then you are taking a stand against injustice. The same thing goes with air and earth. The positive of the active internal is a free-flowing of ingenuity and creative thought, something which cannot exist in a stubborn, rigid mind. However, the positives of these four elements, even in spite of the fact that they are polarized, even in spite of the fact that it is dualistic, all of these can coexist together. It is possible to be grounded, standing up for your own well-being, while walking with the natural flow of life, not forcing anything, and being creative and open-minded, open to the possibilities, while also passionately striving towards creating a better tomorrow. The key to all of this is balance. That balance is made possible through the recognition that we are all connected. All of the elements are interrelated and dependent on one another. And by understanding how they are interconnected, by allowing one element to support the others, by finding that balance, we can live our best lives moving forward. This crazy, tumultuous world that we live in can be transformed for the better, but it is up to us to make that happen. As such, I wish you well, my friends, and may peace and love flow through you always.